everyone once again. As usual, honored to introduce the speaker, and this time we are having the sixth session of the masterclass, Sita Mumbai Masterclass. So, like Johnson sir said, this is the 1990 batch, and the 1990 batch and the 99 batch, which I represent, have something unique history or something a connecting link, I would say. We both conducted Amaram, and our course actually got extended by more than 4 years. So it went on to 4.5 years, and in some cases up to 5 years. So we both have the common history. So Prabha got out of CUT in 1990, later half of 1998. And then she joined XIM in Bhubaneswar for her MBA. And by the time she wound out her MBA in 1993, she joined TCS. This is the shortest introduction I have to say till now, because after TCS, she hasn't joined anywhere. She's only been in TCS all these years. But she's moved around the country. She's been in a lot of senior positions and technology side and the various departments of TCS. And currently, Prabha Thomas is the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer. And as expected, she will be talking to us about her favorite subject, how compliance is needed in today's world. So, without much further ado, I pass over the Prabha Thomas. The floor all yours. All the best.
Thank you very much, Papan and Johnson, for that introduction. Actually, I must say I'm very honored to be addressing this audience. It's not, very often that you get to meet, at least in this way, a lot of your batchmates and alumni. And I think the core team has been doing a fantastic job in organizing these master classes, and I think they have supported me in for this session as well. And I will be talking about the topic of compliance. I think Papan has already put out a lot of posters on this topic. I hope some of you understood what that is about, and maybe for some of you who may not be sure what exactly the topic was about, I will talk about it. So as Papan said, after my engineering, I did my MBA and then joined TCS. Of course, I was in the third batch of computer science and engineering, 1990 batch in CET. So TCS obviously was being an IT organization. It was kind of very well suited to my engineering background, while I had completed my management education as well. So while I started in TCS with in the engineering space, actually doing projects, actually doing programming for the first 1 or 2 years, I quickly moved on to project management and working with many of the large customers of TCS, especially in the banking and financial services space. But I've been in TCS for now 27 years. I've done a variety of roles, and I moved on from actually, IT delivery and project management to a more enterprise level roles, whether it was quality, process excellence, business process management, and so on. And in the last few years, I've been working in the area of enterprise risk management and compliance. So here, the word compliance in my role and what I'm going to speak about today is about regulatory compliance. I think compliance means a lot of things to many people, which is it's a word used in many ways. And today's focus would be, however, on regulatory compliance, which is related to the law of the land. So a little bit about my organization. I think most of you obviously may have heard of TCS, but I just want to say that in the context of my role, because TCS as an organization, we operate in more than, we have offices in more than 50 countries, and we have a global workforce. And that spread makes the role of compliance, regulatory compliance, even more complex, because we are not talking just about India, where most, let's say, majority of the people are, but about the law of the land of 50 plus countries. So let me start this session, and I will just share my slides. I want to just make a disclaimer. One is, while we are talking about regulatory compliance, I am not a legal person, so I'm not a lawyer, number one. And the second thing is, I will be talking about some examples of organizations, and so there will be some organizations which will be named in the presentation I make, but all information that is there is based on public information. So I just want to put that out. It's all publicly available information. I have no inside information of any of those organizations. Some of you may be working in those organizations as well, and you may know better actually. Okay, so I hope you can see my screen. So I'm calling this session as driving on the right side, and that is also because there are two sides, right, to many things. And in the case of regulations and in the case of law, I think we would all agree it is better to be on the right side. And we'll talk about why we need to be driving on the right side. Any business you're in, whether you are employee in an organization, whether you're a manager, whether you are a owner of the business, whether you are a CXO, you may be having a startup, but regulatory environment in the where you operate is something that one really cannot avoid, because any business that has to be conducted has to be conducted within an ecosystem, and the regulatory environment is very much part of it. So but if you look at the regulatory environment, and what most people say in business is it's just too complicated, right? There are too many things like this. You're actually driving on a road like this, so many crisscrossing, you don't know how to get from A to B, and you have to navigate all these flyovers and roads to get to what your business is trying to do. So there is a lot of talk, and people talk about ease of doing business, right? The ease of doing business. The governments are trying to look at how do they attract more investment, how do we make it easy for investors and maybe even foreign companies to come, let's say, and work in India. So one has to navigate through this whole, gamut of laws and statutes, regulations, rules to actually conduct your business. Now, why is it important? The one single factor I will talk about is anything to do with compliance directly affects reputation. Okay, and this is a very famous quote that you can see. We all work very hard, right, to build up our career, to build up our businesses, and in our organizations. And it takes a lot to build a reputation, and all it takes is probably 5 minutes to destroy it. So compliance is one of those aspects which can really impact your company and your business in a very bad way, and not something which is easily recoverable as well. Of course, there are organizations who do come back, who do change their ways maybe, and come back to do a very sustainable and profitable business. But this is the single important thing, and this is not typically a risk which somebody would like to take and say that, okay, let me not, follow the law. So if you look at that again, why is it important? And the first question comes, if you need to follow a law, you need to know what the law is, right? So that's the first thing. You need to know what the law is in terms of where you operate. So I remember this incident where this was around 10 years back. I think my brother-in-law came from Kerala to Mumbai and got into the car, in the front seat he was sitting. And this car started, and we were driving, and then I realized he wasn't wearing a seatbelt, right? So I said, you have to wear your seatbelt. He says, no, it's all right. No, don't bother. I said, no, you have to wear it, because in Mumbai, there is a fine if you don't wear it. But at that time, probably in Kerala, there wasn't. But the point to remember is, if a police catches you, right, on the road, not knowing the law that in Mumbai that I have to wear a seatbelt, doesn't excuse you, right? You will still get a ticket. So this is a very important thing, whether it is in our normal daily life as citizens or in business, that unless you know what you are supposed to comply with, what are the regulations that impact your business, it is not possible for you to actually run your business in the way it's expected to be. So enterprises talk about compliance a lot. I'm sure maybe in your role you may not be involved in this, but there would be many other groups in your company, like if you take the HR function, or if you take the IT function, if you take the finance function, all of them have a lot of work in the area of compliance, right? So there are laws and regulations which are there in every country. You have seen many, I think, news items which talk about, financial crisis or bankruptcies and so on. Many companies getting into severe crisis situations because of maybe governance issues. There are, of course, customers who expect you in the sense the enterprise to be compliant. It is a competitive advantage as well, because one wouldn't want to do business with someone who has a potential to get into a high risk area of compliance. And then there are sometimes standards, excellent standards, and which organizations are expected to follow, maybe being in a particular industry, again maybe for competitive advantage, which also drives compliance. Internally, I think the most important thing is the internal governance and the values and culture of the company. So it is something that I think you should all go back, and if you're not familiar with what your company says about this, it'll be good for you to go back and number one, check if is there a code of conduct that your organization has. Many organizations do have that. So that's probably the first thing that will tell you what does the company say about how people should behave and how the organization should behave, right? And what can we do and what are the guiding principles? So that's something you could look at really to understand from the values of the organization, and a good aspect of culture you may understand from the code of conduct. And that is the expected culture. Now, it doesn't mean that if there is a code of conduct, that's how everybody operates. It doesn't mean that at all. The actual culture will be what people do. So it is always an endeavor to, be as per what the code of conduct says. Then, of course, there could be contractual reasons where between suppliers, customers, third parties, partners, you have commitments on compliance, so which also needs you to comply. Then I think aspects like security and all, we are all very familiar with, and there are more things like that which we see in the papers and we read in the papers. I will talk about a bit more in terms of data privacy and so on as well, which are all which all impacts the compliance of the organization. Right? So I mentioned that the first thing is you need to know what you need to comply with. Now, this is a line we all hear, right? Ignorance is bliss, and that's probably true in love. But in the case of law, it is not so, right? In the case of law, ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is not an excuse, right? Nobody, no court, no authority, regulatory authority will excuse you if you say, we didn't know we had to do this, right, in the business. So the first most important thing for any organization is to actually be on top of what regulations are applicable for my business and what are the changes that are happening to the regulatory environment. And I will tell you from my experience, every day somewhere in the world or the other, and definitely in India, regulations are changing. Okay, so you as a someone who is running a business or managing a business have to be on top of this and keep changing your own business processes to incorporate the regulatory changes that are coming in. So that itself is a very big challenge for most organizations. Now we talked about countries. So here is a world map, right? One very important thing to understand about law is that there is this concept of jurisdiction. Okay, so a law or a regulation is typically falls and is applicable for a jurisdiction. A jurisdiction could be a country. A jurisdiction could be within a country, like a state. So like in India, there are laws at India level, which are central laws. There are laws at state level, state laws, Maharashtra, let's say. Then there are laws for a particular city, let's say. So Mumbai, so the neighboring district, which is Thane, which is, we all generally talk of Mumbai, Thane together, but these are two different districts. There could be laws which are different there. So in other countries, we may talk about laws at county level as well. So these are jurisdictions, right? So there is a hierarchy from federal or central laws coming down to all the way to the city you are in, right? This is what you see on the screen is a project which is called the World Justice Project, which has looked at 128 countries and rates them by what they call as a rule of law index. All right, and this is by way of these 8 aspects that you see here, whether it's open government, regulatory, enforcement, absence of corruption, and so on. So across, and criminal justice and so on. So across these 8 aspects, the countries are ranked, and by the color coding, you can make out that the countries which are green, towards darker green, is supposed to have a much better rule of law, and the ones towards the continuum of yellow and red is having a much weaker rule of law. So this is a interesting way to understand how, if you are operating in that country or working in that country, even as a citizen or as a person running a business, right? The environment that you're operating in for your business, right? So we also very often find that regulations in some countries are very crystal clear, right? It's very clear what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do. Whereas in many other countries, it's open to interpretation. And then obviously people interpret it to their advantage, right? So all this leads to a lot of variation in the way people are complying, number one. Second and most important thing is the enforcement. So there are countries, even in India, there are many laws which we would like to call as dead laws, right? So it was maybe written at the time of the British. It's still an active, valid law. Nobody is implementing it, and nobody is enforcing it either. So it's kind of a dead law, but the law is there. So it all depends on the the government and the legislature and all, and the regulatory bodies which have to look at this and keep the regulatory regulations in line with what the society needs today, with the challenges of today, and so on. So a lot of changes also keep happening. And this year, I think in India, very big changes are coming. We will talk about that as well in the coming few slides. Now, where does India lie here? As you can see, it is in yellow color. So we are somewhere in the middle. So India is ranked 69 out of 128 countries. And our score is right somewhere in the middle, 0.51 out of 1. So what happened to organizations in all these countries? So it doesn't mean that a country which was in green, which looked like, that's a country where the rule of law is very good, nothing goes wrong there. It's not so, right? Here are examples of organizations which you all recognize, right? where a lot of things have gone wrong. They may be in India, they may be in US, they may be in UK, they may be in many other countries. And you can see that for various reasons, big brands, which we all respect, where we think that nothing can go wrong, indeed something goes wrong. Right? Now, why do these things happen? Each one is a good case study by itself, and these are things we have to understand. And most importantly, what we have to understand is every member of the organization, every employee plays a role in this. Okay, that is something. So each of us in the organization we are working in, or if you are running your own business, we have a significant role to play. And we may think I'm part of a very large company. What am I, one person, going to impact? But in many of the stories, you will find that what has actually happened in organizations, that it started with maybe one person, right? Starts with one person, and then of course there could be many other people who supported that person in whatever they did, and it ended up in the front page of the newspaper, and that's not typically what you would want to see when you wake up in the morning. So let us understand this a bit more, and what I would like to do is actually talk about a few areas which are very important for individuals like us. So I'm not going to talk about a lot of compliance areas which organizations need to comply with, like you have employment and labor law, you have taxation, you have import-export controls, you have corporate secretarial area, which is the company law, right? If you're a listed company and so on. And there are health and safety laws. There are other laws in the area of IT laws. There are data privacy laws, intellectual property. And then there are a lot of laws which are a bit on the softer area, like anti-bribery and corruption, and harassment, discrimination. So you look at it, any of these areas, there are laws in various countries. Now, there is a difference in the level of which some laws are very detailed, prescriptive. The consequences of breaking the law may be very high in some country, in another country it may not be. So depending on where you operate, this is something that each of us need to understand. But I will stick to certain areas of compliance which are important for individuals, right? In terms of our own conduct and how that plays a role in the compliance of the organization. So one thing that you can see many people say is that, well, oh my God, there are 100,000 compliances we have to do in my company, and it's just too much, because there's a lot of investment required, time required, effort required, money required, everything. But the fact is, just like we saw in the previous slide, if that's expensive, one should look at what's the cost of non-compliance. So the cost of compliance may be high, but the cost of non-compliance is absolutely goes through the roof. So here is one story, which is one of my favorite stories, and I think you all may have read it in the papers. This is Volkswagen, German engineering. So I think as engineers, we would all love to, know more about the engineering, right, in the automobile space here. But what happened to this company in 2015, right? In 2015, the scandal called Dieselgate broke out, right? And what happened was around, I think the issue started somewhere in 2008, but it became public and it was discovered in 2015, so to say. So Volkswagen, because of manufacturing cars, had to obviously comply with the regulations in the area of emissions, right? There are such regulations which are there in many of the industries. So they had to ensure that the emissions from the car are, within a certain limits which are given by the law. So while there are certain limits given in Germany, it's possible that in the US it is slightly, more stringent, right? That's possible. Different countries have slightly different varying limits. So while they were trying to meet the new regulations given and the conditions given by the Clean Air Act in the US, Volkswagen found it very difficult to meet that requirement and at the same time meet the performance requirement of the car, the safety requirement, the emission requirement. So you put all these requirements together, they found it difficult to meet it. So somebody in their company decided, well, we have another way, right? And what they did was they decided to put in a piece of software, right, which would detect when a car is being tested. And it was what we call a cheat device or a cheat software. So when the car is being tested, it would give emissions within the tolerable limits. But when the car is on the road, it would obviously be not meeting those emission requirements. Right? So essentially, it was a case of, well, since we are not able to meet those stringent requirements, well, let's somehow pass the test. And this went on the road. And in 2015, once this came out, you can see the various headlines, right? They had to really recall 11 million cars. Can you imagine the cost of doing that? 11 million cars on the road. Overall, the scandal cost them more than 33 billion, okay? 33 billion with various issues. And most of all, it also resulted in criminal prosecution of the executives. So there were 8 executives charged. 2 were already in the US, so they were actually arrested. They are in jail. And the others, because they're in Germany, they could, they were not allowing the extradition to the US, including the CEO, Audi CEO, and Winterkorn, who is the overall CEO. Now, the whole thing blew over, and I think every day on the papers in 2015 onwards, 16 onwards, this was coming. And it so happened that it's not just Volkswagen, but the whole future of diesel technology was questioned. And I think even in the city of Stuttgart, which is where you have, Volkswagen and Audi and Porsche and all the other brands, diesel was getting banned. I think we are all reading about it now, also because of other reasons. But this aspect of Dieselgate also led to a question of were they, the investors were getting kind of, what should I say? They were the investors were suing Volkswagen because they said they were misled, right? Because they did not disclose this, though they knew this issue. And there was also Winterkorn, who was the CEO, was also charged with, this company and along with other 2-3 companies, German companies, in terms of colluding to delay clean air technology. So multiple issues, and their stock prices obviously, got impacted. So the big question here is, while there were some engineers who obviously made that cheat device, it obviously couldn't have been done without the knowledge of the senior management. So there was a whole lot of people who allowed it to happen. So the big question is, how was that allowed, right? And what was the board doing, right? So this is a very good example of a product quality matter, which turned out to cause a huge reputational impact and huge financial impact and a brand impact to this German car maker. So one thing we need to understand is, just to summarize the consequences of non-compliance. People say that, okay, the penalty is just 1 lakh rupees. It's not a big deal, right? I mean, that's something we can afford if it happens. So we hear people talking like that, it's just 500 rupees, I just pay it. But in a case of a business, when you're running it, it's much beyond that. So we are talking about closure of business. There are many laws which have criminal related impacts, right, against CEOs, directors, also key management personnel. And most of all, you will obviously have a problem with customer loyalty, your employees, loss of employee trust, and erosion of brand value. So whether it is the Satyam fiasco, which we all know happened in India, whether it is the Maggie story with the Nestle, right, which was about food safety, and Papan had a nice ad on it. Whether it is about multiple banks in India that we are now seeing getting into big trouble, right? Whether it is about the big tech firms, whether it is Facebook, Google, I think some of you may have, if you followed the papers, all the bosses there had to go and testify, right? So this is a very, very big area with huge consequences. So there are challenges for organizations, but we will again go to talk about what do we do as individuals. So we have seen many times people coming and asking, when you're discussing a compliance matter, just tell me, is it legal? Okay, I just want to know, is it legal? That's it. So the big question we have to ask is, when we say compliance in letter and in spirit, what does it mean? Are we talking only about the legality of it, which is, well, as written, I can always get away with it if I do only so much, right? And I don't really need to stretch and look at what the intent of the whole legalese was. So I like to talk about the letter and the spirit of the law. So the letter is the actual rules and regulations. It tells you have to do this. But the spirit of the law, and there is an intent behind every law. I mean, somebody is not just sitting and writing rules. There is a reason why they write rules, right? So there is an intent. There are principles behind it. So it's very, it's something that is good to look at. In what quadrant do you fall in, right? As an individual or as an organization or as a team, which quadrant do you fall in, right? I'm not saying you have to fall in one quadrant. It's good if you can fall in this quadrant, but which seems the ideal one. But this is just for our own introspection. The simple thing to ask ourselves is, if you are driving in the middle of the night and there are no cars on the road and there's a red light, right? Absolutely no cars coming from anywhere. Would you stop or would you go, right? And that's a decision we all take, right? And each of us may take different decisions. That may seem like a simple matter in our personal life, but it is such matters which also come in professional life and when you are taking business decisions for your organization. So very often it's good to think, okay, first thing is, of course, is it legal? Because you wouldn't obviously want to do anything illegal. Second question is it in line with the company policy, right? Because companies have policies which may be over and something maybe more than the law, what's written in the law. So is it in line with company policy? And the third thing to ask yourself is it as per the values and culture of the company, right? Which is what I mean by is it right? Because the company has some set values and culture and code of conduct maybe, right? So that should probably, if you're ever in a quandary as to what should I do, it may be good to go through these 3 questions, then decide what is the right thing to do. So like I said, for each one of us, our conduct, the way we behave personally, also contributes to the conduct of the organization. So I'll talk about this a bit more, a few areas where each one of us can understand better this area, how we can contribute, what should we do, maybe something we should not do in order to be compliant and help the organization be compliant. One of the most important things, especially if you are in a leadership role or if you are a manager and you have a team with you, is that people in the organization, your team looks up to you, right? Your company may have a wonderful code of conduct, right? May have wonderful policies, but finally people look up to their bosses and learn from their bosses. So culture actually gets built like that. So the demonstrating your commitment, each of us to the standards of the organization, is the demonstrating part, is what I mean, is very important, because that's the only way, the team or the people who look up to you understand how as an organization we should be. So let's talk about a few areas. The first area I'll talk about is anti-bribery and anti-corruption. Another world map. Now, what is this? A lot of reds in this map, unlike the earlier one. So this is again just is a project done by Transparency International, which tells you the corruption perception index, and this is something they do every year across the world. And again, here is a continuum you see from yellow to red. And the yellow one is the light yellow is the very clean countries with respect to bribery and corruption, and the darker reds are, as you go that side, it is worse, right? Gets worse. So you can clearly see here some very light color yellow. For example, here, right? These are the Nordics, which are considered very, very clean countries from this point of view. Now, why am I showing you this? Because in case you happen to be in one of these countries, or your business, operates in one of these countries, that's the environment you're working in, right? You're working with customers, suppliers from these countries. So it does impact the way, people deal with each other in terms of business, and you may have more risks in some country than the other. While we all know one should not bribe and all that, we all know that, right? But that's not necessarily the environment you are in. India, of course, I think we all understand, we all know very well where India is. And I'm sure some of you us have all had maybe personal experiences in our personal life as well, not just in professional life, where we are. So if you see India, out of 180 countries, India is currently ranked at 80, right? And we have a score of 41 out of 100. So very not much improvement. I was looking at last 5 years data, not much improvement in terms of the perception of corruption. Now, there are laws in almost every country, okay, on anti-bribery and corruption. I've just listed 3 laws which are, maybe very important for all of us. The first one is the law from India, which is the Prevention of Corruption Act. We call it PCA. That's the anti-bribery law in India. Then you have the UK and the US laws, UK Bribery Act and the US FCPA laws. Now, why I'm calling out UK and US law is because there is one very important aspect about these laws, and also in 1 or 2 other countries, that these are extraterritorial in nature from their jurisdiction perspective. So usually, like I said earlier, a law has a jurisdiction. So it is applicable only in that jurisdiction. So if there's a law for Maharashtra, I can't apply it in Telangana or in Kerala, right? I can't. That's a Maharashtra law. It doesn't become applicable in Kerala, for example. But in the case of UK Bribery Act and the FCPA, these have worldwide jurisdiction. So if you have any connection to UK or US, you may be in India doing some, running your business, running your operations, but by any connection, and I mean any, it doesn't have to be direct connection also, you will become, you are susceptible to the jurisdiction of this law. So this is something all of us need to understand. There are many laws like this, whether it is a Sapin Act in France, and every country has, so I'll not go into that. Now, what is important here is when we say bribery, it's not just taking a bribe, but it's also offering a bribe, promising to offer a bribe, right? So there's a slight variation in different laws, but these are all considered no-nos. Most importantly, public officials in government, right? And government officials, that's where the crux of the matter is again, considered much more serious. Some laws don't cover private organizations, but pretty much all countries talk about, cover the public officials. In India, if you look at it, till 2 years ago, taking a bribe was considered, illegal as far as the law is concerned. But now even giving a bribe is, right? Since the last 2 years, I think 2018, there was an amendment. So just for all of you to know, if you give a bribe to a public official, and I'm just talking in other countries, of course, in India also, if you give a bribe, it is a illegal act. You can be, arrested, so to say, and there could be fines. Now, in India, I believe if you are forced to give a bribe, because sometimes there is no way to get ahead but to give a bribe, right? That we have some situations like that, and somebody forces you to give a bribe. I believe if in 7 days you report it, then you will not be held, accountable for that. Otherwise, because you have given a bribe to a public official, you are also part of that illegal act. Now, in business, one of the things we have to also focus on, and these are very may sound normal things we do in business, is the area of gift and hospitality. So it's natural in business to give gifts, receive gifts from other customers, suppliers, partners that you have. You may give gifts to your employees also. But there is some boundary around this when gifts and hospitality goes beyond a certain level, which can be considered as bribery. Okay, so for example, if it is Diwali just got over and your supplier has come and given you dry fruits, right, or sweets as a gift, that's very usual, right? So that sounds okay, let's say. But let's say the supplier comes and gives iPhones to all your entire team. You're from the procurement department. All your team is given iPhones. Now, is that acceptable? It's a question mark, right? Can you accept? Now, so what you have to do is you have to check what's the policy of your company, right? So typically many organizations will have a policy, what is acceptable and not acceptable. So that's something, if you don't know, good to go back and check, does your company have such a policy, and check what is acceptable and not. Similarly, you also should not give, if your policy says don't give a gift beyond 10,000 rupees, suppose, if there are limits like that. So do check that out. The other thing is hospitality. So let's say your supplier is organizing a conference in Bangkok, and supplier says, I'm going to send you tickets and stay, everything I'm going to, on my cost. Should you accept it or not? So again, it depends on what's the policy in your company. You have to go back and look at it. So in my organization, for example, as part of the Tata Group, we have a very solid Tata Code of Conduct. And that's not just for TCS, it's for all Tata companies. And we have policies on each of these in TCS. So every time anyone has a doubt, you have to go back and refer the policy. Is this allowed or not? Is it right or not? So these are things which all of us will at some point of time have a doubt about. And it's good to have clear policies in the company. So there are many examples of large and good organizations falling into this bit of anti-bribery corruption issues, bribery and corruption issues. So this is an example of Rolls-Royce, where they ended up with a $800 million settlement, right? And including charging many individuals as well. The US Department of Justice charged individuals as well. So another one was, I think, Airbus. Airbus paid a $4 billion dollar fine, and this was on bribery and as well as export control related compliance issues. So the numbers for such large these companies are not small. It can sometimes make or break as well. But there are also organizations who have come back, who have remediated the problem, who have changed. Of course, the CEOs, when you get into such large problem, the CEOs obviously have to go, right? You have seen there are many cases where CEOs have to go. New management comes in and they set it right, but it takes time. it takes, and it costs, it is absolutely would have done a lot of damage before they can recover. The second area I'll talk about is harassment, right? Now this is becoming a very, very I think has become an important topic maybe in the last few years, because, or rather got more eyeballs because of the Me Too movement that we have all heard about. So there is workplace harassment, there is specific sexual harassment, right? So sexual harassment involves unwanted or unwelcome conduct. Now, again, it is an act which any one of us, anyone can be part of. It doesn't have to be something extreme, like you would think some very extreme case of sexual harassment, but anything that is unwelcome, even directly or even by implication, becomes called as sexual harassment, and the person who is impacted, right, has the right to state that this was harassment. So while the person who actually perpetrated the act may say, I didn't even know, I didn't even realize that the person has misunderstood, right? But the law in India especially will give weightage to the person who is facing this unwelcome conduct. So whether it is physical advances, whether it is a request for sexual favors, whether it is maybe even telling vulgar jokes which people who are hearing don't appreciate at all or can't even palate, right? Showing pornography, of course, and any other unwelcome physical, verbal or even non-verbal conduct is considered harassment and is not expected, not allowed in the workplace, definitely, or even otherwise. So in India, we have the law called POSH, Prevention of Sexual Harassment. And I think everybody, whether you are in India or in the US, because the US also has many laws in every state, it is mandatory to be trained on this. So I'm hoping that most of you would have already undergone some kind of training on what is this all about, and what should one do if one comes across a case of harassment. So in organizations, there are committees called the IC, right, which is a internal complaints committee, which has it's a quasi-judicial committee actually, and any cases like this, any complaints like this in the office, in the workplace, and when I mean office, it doesn't mean the office building, but anywhere where anything to do with work. So if you're working from home, or if you're traveling on business, any place. So I don't mean office as in the office building. It's considered as a workplace, and there are committees in India. It's mandatory for companies to have that committee who will look into this. Of course, you can go to the police and file an FIR as well. Now, let me shift a bit from, we talked about harassment, anti-bribery, which are all very, softer aspects of our, behavior and so on, but to actual engineering. Now, we all know that we build products, right? Whether you are in manufacturing or whether you're in IT or whether you're in retail or you're in the bank, products and services. We build it with, the best intent, with the greatest engineering that we can, engineering minds that we have. But if you have to sell a product, there has to be something more than just the engineering piece of it. So for example, a non-compliant product will never sell. If the consumer knows it is non-compliant, it will never sell. So I'll just talk about two areas from a product compliance perspective, which is very, very close to engineering. One is health and safety. So whether you are in construction, manufacturing, energy, power, telecom, even in IT, for example, where you don't actually have a solid product to see, physical, tangible product to see, the concept of health and safety becomes very critical. So there are regulations. I will not go into details of regulations, but I'm sure you in your own area will know, because if you are engineering, doing something, building something, there could be some compliance aspects which have to be taken care of. So there is product safety. So the product itself has to have compliance built into it. So we call that as compliance by design. Right? By design, it has to be built into it. This could be, the most important thing we are talking about today is the vaccine which is coming, right? The COVID vaccine. And we all know that the FDA, FDA is a regulator, right? In the US is going to review the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine on December 8th. And, if they give their approval, then, by 10th, they will start shipping it. So we are reading all that in the paper. So you see that product, which is a vaccine today, has to have, there are certain compliance requirements in the area of life sciences, healthcare around the vaccine, which the FDA is looking into, right? So every industry has such regulations, and I will not go into it. But you will know maybe for your own, or you can talk to people in your industry, in your company, you will understand that. Second is process safety. So if you're running a factory, if you're running some production, life cycle, whichever industry you are in, again, there is, and especially if you talk about factory, for example, factories, which is very straightforward to understand, the safety of being followed in the process, so that both the people who are using the process, the products which are coming out of the process are need to be compliant with respect to safety. And third is, of course, the people safety, actual health of the people, health and safety of the people. So if you look at my industry, which is IT, for example, health and safety of people is, what is health and safety of people? We are not really, running, like a, with a, like a factory, if you want to compare with a car factory or a power, oil rig or something. It's not like that, right? But health and safety again becomes very important because of the way we are working. You sit the whole day, ergonomics, how long are people working? There are countries, many countries have rules that you should not work more than so many hours. If you work more than so many hours, you have to be given overtime, and so on and so forth. So whether it's the Factories Act in India, the Shops and Establishments Act in India, even Air Act, which is about pollution, right? Prevention of pollution. There are many, OSHA, which is in the US, for example. All these talk about health and safety, which has to be built into your product and process as you are creating your items. Second is intellectual property rights. Okay, this is a very, very important area now. So what is intellectual property right? It is your product of your human intellect, right? And there are two aspects to this. Many times we talk about IPR protection, protecting the IP. So some original work that you have designed, it could be patented. It could be, if it's from a marketing point of view, it could be trademarked. If it's an original piece of even music, for example, you have a copyright. There are designs which can be protected. So there are various types of IP, but IP protection is actually more about your invention, your company's invention, or your original idea, which has to be protected, which is a strategic decision that you would take, a business decision that you would take, because you can monetize it later, right? And you don't want somebody else to take your idea and claim advantage there. But so that is not a compliance issue. That is a pure business decision to protect your IP. The compliance issue in IP comes when we talk about IP infringement. So in the product that you are manufacturing, you are designing, have you infringed the IP of another third party, right? So this is a very tricky thing because sometimes, it is all about what you have in your head, right? Knowledge. So few things which I would just like, some of you to think about, especially from an individual perspective, is, let's say you're working in one company, right? After 2 years, you join another company, which is a competitor of your earlier organization. You are carrying knowledge, let's say from your earlier organization, of things which have, the products, the design, and you have now come to this company. You have to be careful, depending on what you have committed to in this company and in the previous company, right? That prior knowledge of, let's say, of what that IP, what that company owns, should not come into your work in this company. This is a very knowledge thing. Second thing is, of course, direct use of components and that you are using, which is anyway direct violation. You cannot use if there's somebody else has a copyright or patent on it unless you go through the right channels. Unlicensed software, for example, this is a very piracy is very common, right? So a lot of things are being done to protect into organizations' assets. So using unlicensed, let's say, software, it is a problem of IP. There is a compliance issue there. So there are multiple aspects like this which will have to be taken care of. So many organizations put in non-compete clauses. So if you are in this job, I cannot, if I have to join another company, maybe for 1 year, you should not join a direct competitor. So there could be many clauses like that which people put in. In some countries, some things are allowed, and some countries it's not. So this is I cannot go into detail because it's a very big topic, but it's something you have to be very conscious about. We may unconsciously do many things and later, get into trouble, and the organization can also get into trouble. Okay. The next topic, again, a very, very hot topic these days, is data privacy, right? So I think we've all been hearing data is the new oil, right? So just like other property that we protect, like whether it is our land, whether it is our gold, whether it is our shares, today data is also something that we have to protect, right? So GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union. This is the most famous privacy law which came in 2 years back in May of 2018, which has, again, it is not limited to Europe. It touches everyone who has anything to do with Europe across the world. So most organizations would be affected by it unless you are operating only in one particular country and you have no employees or customers or suppliers or anyone related to Europe, then it's okay. But otherwise, you definitely will be impacted by it. So why is this a hot topic now? Because from a compliance perspective, this kind of carries one of the biggest risks we have today. So if you see the kind of penalty for GDPR talks about a maximum fine of 20 million euros or 4% of annual global turnover. Right? That's huge. And that's not something any organization can, afford to, take a risk on. So a lot of work has been going on in the last few years in organizations to comply. Now, it's not only in Europe that these laws are there, but this is the big famous one, which has really brought a lot of rigor into how we protect data. And all other countries are actually learning from Europe. So most of the other countries are now revising their laws, right, and coming up with more stringent laws. For example, in the US, there is no one big federal law for data privacy. It's still a state laws, and it's obviously California. It always starts with California because that's where the most stringent regulations are. So California had this law called CCPA, which was California Consumer Privacy Act, which is now called CPRA, California Privacy Rights Act, I think this year. And there are a few other states which have issued privacy laws in the US. US is looking at, I think, more of a federal law as well, which may come in. Now, if you take other countries, every country, most of the countries have. In Singapore, it's called the Personal Data Protection Act. In Canada, it's called as PIPEDA. So more or less all the countries have it, and they are all currently revising their laws because of the experience of GDPR. So in India, as you would have read, there was a bill put in Parliament first in 2018. So the privacy law in India is also something which people are watching out for. There's a lot of conversation on this, which is happening in the industry. So what exactly is personal data? What is the data you have to keep private, right? And what is the thing around it? So personal data is any information concerning which can help you to identify who you are. Okay, identify an individual. So for example, there are some examples I've shown on the screen, but there are also other data which is more sensitive. So for example, your religious convictions, your health data, your political opinion. Are you a Democrat or Republican, for example, right? So these are all what is known as sensitive personal data, right? So some of the laws have further requirements and obligations with regard to sensitive personal data. Now in India, the new law which is coming is going to, from what I know, a little bit that I know, it talks of personal data, it talks of sensitive personal data. It also talks about critical data which have to be in the country. So there is talk about data localization. So certain set of data has to reside in India. It cannot be in a server in the US, for example, right? So you will. This is going to be very interesting once the India law comes in place as well. So what is important for each of us to remember is that we have rights as citizens with respect to data privacy. So it's not just some obligation, but you have rights, and it is very important to protect your data. And if you are going and allowing others to use your data, which is the term there is give consent. And by the way, giving consent is when you log into some site, you will have a lot of things. A notice will come and you say, I agree, right? And most of us say, I agree without reading, right? So you may be actually giving consent to use a lot of your data. When you download an app, the app will ask you a lot of things and you just say, yeah, I agree. So you have given consent for them to use your data. So there are many aspects of this which will become relevant for us as normal citizens. And in an organization, it becomes even more critical because you have to protect the data of your employees. You may have data of your customers. Your employee data may go to third parties, and employees have rights, and they can demand a lot of things from the organization, even in terms of erasing my data. You have the right to be forgotten, let's say, once you leave, and many aspects like that. Now, data privacy is a big topic which we can, have a full one-day seminar on as well. The last thing I want to talk about is on insider trading. So this is again, I think, a terminology some of you may have, most of you would have heard. So what does this mean? This is applicable to listed companies. So your company is, let's say, listed on the stock exchange, and there are people in the company or even maybe outside of the company who have access to unpublished price sensitive information. So UPSI stands for unpublished price sensitive information. And a person who has such information can trade, right? And obviously make gains, which is unfair because they have inside information. So companies identify people in the company who have such information. They are known as designated persons. And such people have certain compliance obligations to be met. For example, they cannot trade just before the quarterly results are coming out. So there are windows when they cannot trade, or if they want to buy or sell this company shares, they have to take approval from the compliance officer. So there are multiple conditions like that which are there. The whole reason why this is there, and this is coming from the SEBI prohibition of insider trading regulations. SEBI is the regulator in India for the companies, is to protect the interest of investors and to maintain confidence in the market, right? So this is mandatory for every listed company. Now, what recently has happened in India, and this is, I think, just maybe 1 or 2 months back, is that if a designated person is going to violate this and they end up trading, they may be doing it unknowingly also. Like a portfolio manager, your portfolio manager may trade on your behalf. You never intended it, but the portfolio manager is doing it. your name will go up on the stock exchange websites of Bombay Stock Exchange and National Stock Exchange, and they are going into name and shame aspect. So your name will go up. You have to pay a fine, and please remember, the fine is not just by the company. It's not by the company. You have to pay the fine. So there have been cases where people have been fined as well. Some directors, some CXOs, or the company itself has been fined in many cases. Right? So there is also a possibility of imprisonment up to 10 years. Depends on what you actually did. So these are things, again, which is very individual, right? It's not something you're doing for the company. It's your own. You are trading the shares of your company. It's your personal matter. But if you are a designated person, or if you have such UPSI information, you are liable as per the SEBI regulations. So these are a set of areas I just try to share to give you insight into, we as individuals and in our own behavior and what we do in the company that we work for, contributes to the compliance of the company. And this is just by conduct. I'm not talking about procedural aspects at all. There are a lot of other compliances which businesses have to do. And these are all simply conduct related matters, personal conduct related matters. So finally, what happens if we find, what do we do? I mean, things can go wrong in a company. Nobody is perfect, I will say. And how much ever sometimes companies try to have an excellent code of conduct and policies and training. Training is very important. Many companies train their people, train them frequently on certain areas which are high risk. Still, sometimes it's possible that there is a bad apple somewhere in the company, right? So one person, a rogue employee, goes and does something. It can happen. So what is important from an organization perspective is, but even if that rogue employee, goes and does something illegal or wrong, which will impact the company, the regulators will, if you are able to show the regulators that you have a very good system in place of compliance culture in place, policies in place, you have done everything that you have to do as an organization, the impact on you and the whether it is a fines or penalties or whatever the regulator is going to dish out to you will be limited, right? They will take cognizance of the fact that you have done everything, but there was a rogue employee, right? So that happened. So companies like ours, for example, in the Tata TCS, or I know of many other organizations also, they have a very clear zero tolerance policy for certain matters, right? Absolutely zero tolerance. So which means if somebody does something wrong let's take the case of sexual harassment, you will be sacked. That's it. You will be terminated if that is proven. So there are some very serious security issues. There is absolutely is all non-negotiable factors, right? You will lose your job. So certain companies take that view and policy of zero tolerance. But yeah, there are organizations which are in in various stages of that. From a chalta hai to it's okay, or you don't want to, or certain people you don't want to take action on. So it all depends on what managements and boards decide to do. Now, what happens if they are not taking action, right? And something is wrong. So the law has given the provision of what we call as whistleblowing, right? So these are very serious fraud, corruption, or mismanagement, very serious things which may be reported to the board, or sometimes even people do a whistleblowing to the media, public authorities, and so on. So that also happens. I think we read about it in the papers. Many of the things come out because of whistleblowers, like the recent the Wirecard scam that was also through a whistleblower. So if you don't know what this is and how to go about this in your company, I'm not saying for every small issue we should not go into whistleblowing. First, you have to exhaust all the internal reporting mechanisms in your organization. There could be grievance mechanisms, some other reporting. So you go through all that. And still, if if the matter is so serious and you are not, if the matter is not addressed, you have the option to blow the whistle. So typically there is a whistleblowing policy. I'm sure the companies where you work may have it. It is required by law, especially for listed many of the companies, even in India. So it is normally published on the website, which will tell what one is supposed to do. Typically, it is reported to the audit committee of the board and so on. Now, in US and all, they also reward people who blow the whistle. So this is a kind of mechanism to improve corporate governance and reward people to come forward and tell if something is going really wrong in organizations. So, I just covered a few areas to give you an idea of in a business, what does it mean while we are, engineers and working on designing and making our products. There are a whole lot of other activity which is happening behind the scenes in terms of regulatory compliance, which many of the corporate functions probably in your organizations may be working on. Right? So finally, how do you keep your company safe? So the best thing is, of course, to prevent compliance issues. So you should have a code of conduct, clear responsibility of who's accountable for these things, policies and procedures. Training is extremely important, because how does each one of us know what to do? We have to be trained. And then there will be teams who do risk assessment to understand, do we need to do anything more or not, and so on. And very importantly, if you are a manager, please discourage non-compliant behavior, because like I said, people follow them, whatever the manager, they look up to the managers, right, to the bosses. So discouraging, actually saying that out is very important. Right? Second thing is, but something can go wrong. So we need to have ways to detect. So I think all of us know there are auditors and so on. So that, of course, is something that happens in all the organizations. Self-reporting is a very good practice as well. And very importantly, to speak up, right? And third is, if once something is detected, take swift action. So this is again very important, because the longer you keep the issues open, the risks are higher, the penalties will get higher, and the regulator will look at it from a very, very different angle, saying that you knew about it, still nothing was done. But as an individual, right? Again, like I said, you look up to your boss, right, and to your management. So as an individual, and if you are a manager especially, the tone at the top and the tone at the middle, when I say middle, I mean middle management. Many of the people maybe who are here may be in the middle or at the top also. So this is most important, because the whole organization is looking to you, and they go by what you actually say and what you actually do. Whatever is written in the documents will be there, but people look at the leaders and look at the managers. So just to summarize, the question is, you have to think when you are running your business, driving down the road, which side are you on? So compliance many times is seen as just ticking the box. So it's good to think sometimes, when we are doing something, am I just ticking the box? So for example, today we have to wear masks, right? Masks are mandatory in many countries now. So we see many people who are wearing a mask, but the mask is actually down, right? So you will say, yeah, I'm compliant, I'm wearing a mask, but it's not effective, right? So very important to think about the intent and the effectiveness of what you're doing than just by, ticking the box and saying, yeah, I'm compliant. So please, in many areas, especially where each one of us have to, be involved in our work, it's important to know your rights, because we have rights as citizens, as employees, we have rights, but we also have duties and obligations, right? So get trained. If you don't know what you're supposed to do, get trained, go and ask the people in there's so much material to read if you want, which is out there online, but talk to the respective departments in your company and understand what you're supposed to do. Second thing I say, we all say, yeah, we know it is not right. We should do this, should not do this. But practically speaking, it's not always easy. So I always feel you have to practice certain behaviors till it becomes a habit, right? So you have to be conscious of that. Sometimes the way we talk, maybe certain words we use. I should not be talking like this because it means something else to somebody else, but I don't mean it, but they hear it in a different way. So you have to be very conscious, and I have to change the maybe the way I speak, right, on a particular aspect. And the last two is, of course, speak up. And there are proper channels to report, so know what they are. And in case, hopefully you don't have to, but if ever you have to, you can report through proper channels. So that's just what I wanted to share. And I think thank you all for patient hearing. I know there are people from the US and other countries as well, not just from India. So we started with saying, are you driving on the right side? So of course, some of you drive on the left and some of you drive on the right. But I just wanted to say that if the law says you have to drive on the left is also right. So thank you for this great opportunity. I hope this was useful to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prabha. That was a wonderful presentation. And we have some questions which people have posted in the Q&A.
Okay.
Before taking that up, we have a small poll which we'll ask the people to take, so that we have feedback on what's our program basically. While it's going on, I will pick one by one. The first one in the question is by Mr. Nathan. He's also from US. Actually, that's a question. Just see if you can answer that. Mr. Nathan, can you please?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So my question is more related to the very first color-coded diagram that you showed, wherein Canada is more and Australia more darker, and then US is little not that darker. Just wondering, how do I translate that diagram? Are you telling me that Canada is more stringent in compliance compared to US, or people in Canada following the compliance? How do I translate that?
So I think you're referring to the rule of law index, right?
The very first one.
The one I showed, yes. So there are multiple factors actually there. So it's not just about are people complying. So it also talks about whether the legal system. Let me just put that up. It talks about, or I'll just talk about it. Yeah, there are 8 factors which are considered, right? So about the open government, fundamental rights, the order and security, which is actual law and order in the country, enforcement by regulators, and justice, civil and criminal, and so on. So it is a combination of multiple factors. So it doesn't necessarily mean that exactly that people are more compliant, but you could presume that because when the law and order is better and when regulatory enforcement is better, naturally you will find that compliance is better, right? So you can actually go and look it up. It's called World Justice Project. You can just Google it, you will find the details. So by country, you can actually see the details of what it says. So you're right, it shows that Canada is slightly better than on the US.
I was expecting they may be looking similar. What is the key differentiating factor between these two countries?
We'll have to, I don't know exactly now which parameter scored more.
Where is it?
Look it up. Yeah, you can look it up. It's called World Justice Project. It will give the rating on each of these parameters, and you would be able to figure that out. Typically, you would see even the 2 world maps that I showed, another one I showed for anti-bribery. Nordics is one geography, which is your Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and so on, where you would see very high maturity in this area, right? Whether any of these you take, so they typically rank very high.
Thank you for the answer.
Yeah,
thank you, Nathan. Next question by Mr. Ravindranath. I'll put him on. Please see if he can answer the question. Mr. Ravindranath.
Yes, I want to know many top businessmen from India just loot and take money from the bank and escape. This I have mentioned in the sum. Is it due to lack of regulation or our will to bring them back to India and take action against them?
I think that's a very, very good question, and something we are all, I think, concerned about. So you see, there are two things. Before the person runs away, right? It's not that something just happened and the person runs away the next day, right? This has been happening over years and years, right? Whether it is fraud, whether it is undue favors which have been given, whether it is by banks or other organizations and so on. So the important thing is the controls, internal controls which are there in the banking and financial system has to be much more stronger, and the regulators, including RBI and others, have to play a much bigger role in detecting these issues before it becomes, before we get to the state where people are running away and all. So one is about internal controls. Second, like you rightly mentioned, the will of people. So the people who have to act, people who are in a position, who have to act, who have to take those decisions, they are, whether they are doing it, why are they not doing it? That's a good question to ask. And that also reflects on the various, pull and push that is happening, right? Maybe they are getting influenced, maybe in some ways. That's also possible in many cases. So it is a combination of multiple things. Now, coming to extradition and so on, that again falls back to the legal system, right? Is that possible? Now, you need to have bilateral treaties and agreements between countries. If these things, if you actually need to, if another country will allow you to extradite people. So it is not that just because somebody has run away, the police can go and catch them and bring them back, even if they get them. It doesn't work that way. So there has to be agreements between countries and a legal system which will allow it. So our country or any other country have to get into such arrangements with other countries. So there is a lot of obviously political will and other legal matters which have to be considered. So it's not a simple matter at all. And if you see many people, Britain, I think, is a place where many people seem to be going. So again, how does that country look at it? And how do other countries engage with, let's say, Britain or the US or any other, country needs to be looked at. I mentioned the case of Volkswagen, right, where in the US they put criminal charges on some executives, but they were in Germany, and Germany was not willing to extradite them to US. So you can't really arrest them. So as long as you stay in Germany, you can't arrest them, though there is an order out for them. Same case. So there are similar cases, whether it is in business, banks, and other big frauds which are happening.
Even few days back, there was a news that another 1,200 crores have been taken from bank by fraud. So that also the recent news has come.
Yes.
That means a lack of regulation or some connivance done by the officials concerned. Like that, it is repeatedly happening in India.
You're right, and I'm sure both are there. If you look at what the some of the things recently, which at least in the banking sector we have come to know is in terms of tightening governance, I think some amendments and all have come. I also know that they have made it mandatory for banks to have a role called the chief risk officer. I think now even NBFCs are supposed to have its mandatory roles. Role. So these roles are supposed to be, overseeing these kind of aspects like frauds and other big risks that can hit the organizations. Yeah.
Thank you very much, madam, for answering my question. Thank you very much. It was a very informative and useful talk today. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi. Next one also is on Code of Ethics from Ajit Kumar. He was our member currently in Cochin. Ajit?
Yeah. Good evening.
Good evening.
I work in Federal Bank. For the last 10 months, I am in compliance department. So I was very keen listening to you. And the one or two points which you mentioned about banking, I will say now it is much more stringent in banks. We have a chief risk officer and a chief compliance officer who both are actually directly reporting to maybe partly to the MD and CEO, and maybe they have a direct contact with the board. So that is the importance that is getting now in banks. So my question on you started with mentioning about code of ethics. So what I was trying to find out, every organization will have some aspects of ethics. Say for example, integrity, acting in the best interest of the customer, etc. Okay, but how do you I have two questions on that. How do you judge as to where do we stand? Point number one. And point number two is that how do you actually drive it? The point is that everybody wants to improve on that particular score. So how do you do that is my two questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ajit. I think very important questions, and this is something which all of us, even in my role, I keep thinking about. So if you look at where do you stand on this? Well, organizations typically, while you may have a code of ethics, you would have a more detailed policy to implement some of these areas. Okay, and when you have a policy, then that follows with you need to have systems and processes in place to implement this, right, and to monitor this. So one way is, of course, to by way of monitoring, there has to be internal controls in each of these areas which are monitored. There has to be some mechanism internally for people to report issues, ethical issues, right? And that is one way to know whether we are having issues in our organization in this area. But of course, the point is not everybody may report. And that anyway is not doesn't really tell you the whole story, because many things may be under the carpet as well. So monitoring becomes very important. Audits become very important. So independent audits, and I'll use the independence word is very important. Independent audits in these areas are important, which will uncover a lot of things which actually you are not able to uncover yourself also. So these aspects become key. Third, and today in the last few years, I will say, and it's something which all organizations are focusing on, is the use of digital and the use of analytics. So in every area today, with the power of analytics and technology that is there, one is able to actually uncover a lot of things that is happening, which by traditional means you can't. So if you take fraud, for example, a lot of fraud analytics solutions are there. Okay. Or in any other area you can, because there is a lot of data in the organization, but the human eye and the human mind cannot actually sift through millions of data to find patterns and, trends. So technology is something I think we should all, bank on to help in the area of risk and compliance, which we do as well. So now it's sounding like I am being from a technology company, I am advocating it, but that is the truth, right? You can't do it in any other way these days. From a culture of compliance aspect, I have to say that most important thing is the tone at the top, right? So right from the CEO to the other CXOs, to the business unit heads, to the leaders, to the managers, at every level of leadership, people need to be speaking the right language, the right things as per what we expect the company to do. So having a code of conduct or ethics is of not much use if people don't talk about it. So, I think Enron had a 80-page code of conduct. It didn't do them any good, right? So these are all documents, policies, code of conduct, all documents, but people have to practice it. So people have to speak about it. People have to implement it. People have to be trained. Very, very importantly, everyone has to be trained, because you can't expect someone who's joining the company to know all these things. Obviously, we have to train our employees. If you don't know about it, go and get trained. Go and ask for help as an employee if it's not forthcoming from the organization also. So these are things which are very important. And I think when something goes wrong in the company and you find some significant non-compliance, action has to be taken. And that action should be visible to people, right? So that people know that what is written in the code, what is written in the policy, we really mean it. It is not just there for, showing some auditor or showing somebody, some regulator saying, okay, I have all these documents. So I think all these things, if we do together, people will see that, the organization means what it says in the code of ethics.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. In fact, I am also looking for using some of the machine learning and maybe analytics techniques for compliance. See, our organization already uses analytics for business. So now how to put that into a control perspective is what we are thinking about. Of course, I'll be keen even learning more about it, maybe in the coming days. Thank you for that. Okay.
Yeah. See, I just want to add, in India, if you see the Companies Act, which was revised in 2013, I think it was effective 2014. The earlier one was 1956, so you can imagine. Of course, though there have been amendments to it. In the 2013 Companies Act, which is the current version of the Companies Act, a very strong focus has been given on internal financial controls and the fact that companies should have an internal control framework. And that's something that now the auditors have to audit too. So I think a lot of rigor the regulators are trying to put it by emphasizing on having such systems in place. So if you do it in the real intent and with the real belief that it will improve governance in your company, it will work. The problem is when people do it, in quotes, for the sake of compliance, just to show auditors. The auditor RI, let me just show this, get away with this. That's not going to help in the long run.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ajit. Next, I had a very long comment from Mr. CVR Murthy. He's not here.
Okay.
We will respond to that later. There was not really a question. He was making some suggestions how this can be improved. And I'm also not finding Mr. Ram Kumar, who has raised some comments rather than questions. I can't find Mr. Ramesh Ganesh. Yes, Mr. Ram Kumar is here. I will allow him to talk. Mr. Ram Kumar?
Yeah, unmute, yes.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Can I speak now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, very, very well presented, Madam Prabha. Well presented.
Thank you.
In fact, compliance is the word. which is lying at the back of the mind in very senior positions. In fact, that is a driving force which we always keep in the mind. What is compliance? To my mind, our Indian traditional values have been lettered and again, and it has become a compliance, maybe more on the legal side. Many times, basically, I was in the oil industry in very senior positions. The safety used to get top priority in any of our dealings. So whenever we have anything in mind, we used to have the safety as our top-notch compliant parameter. As a top manager, even though many things are written, organizational values are there. Still, at the top managerial positions, it is the top manager has to have ways and means of listening to murmurs so that he can see what is unseen by others. Then only I think we can come out and manage the situation. One more question what I have is the personal data we are sharing with many agencies, our own date of birth, so many things. How can we protect ourselves from these things?
Thank you, Mr. Ramkumar, for your question. I think your point is spot on in terms of the way compliance has to be looked at. If you look at personal data, I will just give you maybe 2-3 examples which may be useful for all of us. And this is just in our daily life, how we are using maybe some data which we have, which may belong to other people, maybe people in our team. Okay, you may have personal data of people belonging to your team. Or in your, if you are a HR person, let's say an HR person will have a lot of personal data of, let's say, employees. Or you may have, let's say, a customer visiting your organization. So you will have some data of the customer with you because they are visiting, right? And you need some information, maybe even passport number and so on. So one very important thing, and this just as a habit, we have to be very careful. If you have data, personal data of somebody else, right? And you need to share it with somebody for some work, be very careful what you are sharing. So number one, share it only with the people who need to know. So we have this habit of CCing a lot of people, right? All of us love emails, right? You CC the world. So you have to be careful. Second is, if you are, let's say, typically we see even in our company, Excel sheet, you'll have Excel sheet, all of us have, right? With a lot of data. Something you have to send to somebody. Actually, you need to send only 2 columns in that sheet. There's personal data in that sheet, okay? But that sheet will have 10 columns with a lot of other data as well. But for the purpose you are sending, maybe only 2 columns are required. But it's an Excel sheet, you just send the whole thing, right? So now you have sent more data than you should have, right? So the purpose for use is very important, right? Third is, an email is the easiest thing to forward. We all know that, right? It's the easiest thing to forward. So if you have let's say an Excel sheet or a Word document or whatever with personal data, practice password protecting it. That's the least you can do personally. I'm not talking about organizational controls. So organization will put many controls, okay? Which, even in our organizations, for example, in my company, we are absolutely paranoid about security and privacy. Very, very paranoid because our customers are paranoid about it, right? So there are a lot of things we can't do in my company. Like if I send a mail to some Gmail ID, forget personal data, even normal security, it will get blocked, okay? Unless I take care of, I have to go through some channel, okay? Some proper channels to do it, or follow some proper controls. So when you forward an email with personal data or an Excel sheet with personal data, password protected, number one. Now, very important is when you password protect it, I have seen people, they very nicely, they'll password protect it. But in the same mail, they'll put the Excel sheet and write, this is the password in the same email. So you see, you have, now it's of no use. The control of protecting that Excel sheet is of no use because you have put the email in the same email, password in the same email. So a practice is you send the Excel sheet by email and then you, let's say, SMS the password to the person. So now it is in 2 different channels, right? One is an email and one is on your SMS. Or you pick up the phone and tell this is the password. Don't send the password in the same mail. So there are these small things which each of us in our daily lives we do, which we don't realize, but these are all will hit us when the law, if there is a law, especially in India, when it comes, it will hit. People who are in Europe and all are extremely alert, and they are very much, they're aware of what they can do and cannot do because of the huge risk that we have from a privacy perspective. Another example I will give is, if you have to book an air ticket, right, and you have a travel agent, right, and if you have to book an air ticket, of course you have to give your date of birth, right, because that may be required in some cases to book an air ticket. But if you have to book a cab to go from Mumbai to Pune, right, now the age doesn't matter, or the date of birth doesn't, age also doesn't matter. What does it matter if you are 20 or if you are 60, right? It doesn't matter. So, but what we see sometimes in organizations is, okay, I have to book travel, means age, date of birth, XYZ, all this data is given and it goes outside the organization to a third party. So this is again another aspect to be very careful. And another very practical thing which I have seen is mails. As you know, you get mails are forwarded, right? So there are chain mails, right? So there are 10 mails actually, below. So the mail that comes to you has nothing to do with personal data. It is just a 2-3 line mail, maybe something to do with your work. But when you go below the mail, go page down, you will find somewhere below there is somebody has included some personal data for some matter. A customer is coming tomorrow. This is the customer's passport number, okay, and all these things. And the guy is coming from Europe. Now, if the customer is coming from Europe, GDPR is applicable to you, okay. So, and you have forwarded that mail. You don't notice it because it is right at the bottom of the email, but you would have violated one principle, okay, of sharing data, which the customer will then ask you, why the hell was my data made available to so many people in your company? It's not required. So these are all very practical things I'm talking about, simple day-to-day stuff, but we have to become very conscious. If we are not conscious, if we don't build that privacy culture, it is very difficult. So I know that organizations, even in our organization, because we are very large and we work in many countries, while process, policy, everything is there, building the culture and making each person conscious of what is personal data, what can we do, what we cannot do, is critical. It takes time. We have to invest in doing that.
But while sharing our own data, like our Aadhaar number, Aadhaar copy and all that, so many things we share. That means we stand to risk, we stand to get into trouble or no?
If it is misused by the person who is getting it, there could be trouble. So one practice which people today, see, the law is not yet there in India, so people ask for everything we give. One practice which you can adopt is, when you give a Xerox of your photocopy of your Aadhaar card, write on top of it that it is for, let's say, account opening purpose for this bank, and you have given it to this bank. So and across it, so that if it lands up somewhere else, at least you have said, I am giving it only for this purpose. I mean, that's what you can do to protect if it is really required. And you have to be conscious not to give it where it's not required. So yesterday I went to a shop, I bought something, they asked for my phone number. I said, why do you need my phone number? No, we have to put the phone number. Without that, I cannot print the bill. So, you're like, no, I can't give you my phone number. No, I need the phone number. So now you are stuck. So then the only thing you can do is give your phone number with, maybe, if you are so paranoid about it, give a wrong phone number, because you are kind of stuck at that place, because you'll not get a bill otherwise, they say. So once the law comes, there will be a lot of upheaval. Many processes, systems, all will have to change, whether it is in retail, whether it is in banking, healthcare especially, because a lot of sensitive data is there in healthcare as well.
So, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramkumar. We have one more question, Prabha. Can we take that? It's from Janardhan Kurup.
Sure.
Janardhan Kurup, can you please?
Yes, I'm audible.
Yes.
Hey, hi Kurup.
Hi.
Good to hear you.
Hi Prabha. I think it was a great session, and thanks first of all to Sita Mumbai for organizing these webinars. I've been closely following this. Thanks, SITA Mumbai. And Prabha, I'm a batchmate of Prabha.
Yes.
Great session. So it was
and a good friend.
To you. So my question was, I think maybe since I heard that there's a lot of SITA alumni who's joining, maybe you can spend some time in talking about your journey in terms of starting with the technology background. I know that you shifted to quality, the process side, and now you are into an enterprise level role as the chief risk and the compliance officer. So how did this change take place, and what are the opportunities in this area so that the folks who are the newer folks who are listening to it can get to it? That is one question. Maybe the second, if you have time, maybe you can also talk about how the post-COVID area may change some of the things on the compliance side, because a lot of work from home, even though it has facilitated a lot of good things, it is also bringing in a lot of risks related to compliance, because we don't, and especially in India, which is not very conducive to work from home, because people are like, there are bachelors staying together. So when you work, when you take work to those places, how do you make sure that there is compliance?
Yeah, thank you, Kurup. Ajit, do we have time? I can answer that and go ahead.
Yeah, I think you can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think to your first question, Kurup, yes, I did start, in the technology space. So I was actually 27 years ago doing programming to start with. There are youngsters here. That is how I started. What was very interesting was as I moved into project management and then later into other roles, I kind of developed an appreciation for process, right? And how process is very important to ensure product quality, right? So that's where I was working in quality and so on. So risk management, as in a project risk management, was a natural part of project management and program management. So got into that. But I will be frank to say, in our company, it's not that people have to, be in one area their whole lives. So we are very open to move people across domains and across business units and across geographies and so on. So there were a lot of opportunities. And I think it is because of my experience in quality and process excellence and so on, which gives you a kind of good standing on how, if I want to scale a policy process across the company and have a common framework and implement things, how you can do it, right? So that experience, I think, probably was is one area which helped me to move here. But I will tell you, when I moved into this role as the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer 2 years back, I joined 3 years back, and then 1 year my predecessor was there with me, and then I took over that role. It was, I pretty much thought, after being in TCS for 22 or 25 years, I knew the company very well. I mean, I actually thought I did know the company very well. But when I moved to this role, I realized that I had never seen the organization from this lens. And this is a very different lens of looking at your business. So I have personally learned a lot in the last 3-4 years in this area. It's been really eye-opening for me, and that keeps us all, learning new things keeps us all motivated and energized. And it goes on to say that I think whatever each one of us is doing in our own area is very important for the organization, whatever we are doing, whatever work we are doing. But the fact also is that there are a lot of other things which has to go in tandem to, keep a business successful and make it sustainable and profitable and so on. So it's good to look at, other angles. And if there are other people in your company who come and tell you that something needs to be done, or some others, the safety folks or the quality folks or the compliance folks, somebody, security guys come and tell you something. I think the important thing is to, understand why, because there are reasons why they are probably doing it, which is important for business. So it's good to understand why and, work with them to do that if that's obviously of adding value to the business. So I am actually enjoying the role. I've forgotten all my engineering, I think, but of course, having started like that, it helps you to understand the business, understand the customers, and work with everyone else. The second question, I think, Kurup, was about what was the second question? Sorry, I was, let me see if I got that right.
How the work from home is going.
Yeah, work from home, right. I think a very, very important thing, and this is something that takes up my time as well these days. So we are all working from home, not only in India, but I think most countries, we are some countries are in second wave, some countries are in the third wave of COVID, and so on. So it adds a whole lot of risks to the organization. So like Kurup exactly said, you may have a competitor staying with you. It may be your spouse, it may be your roommate. You may have your customers' competitors staying with you. So let's say in our kind of a business, let's say I work for Citibank and I have a Bank of America, spouse, or I have a, somebody, or working for some other company or my own company, but working for Bank of America. So which are, let's say, competitors. So normally in IT kind of companies, it's all segregated. You have segregated delivery centers. But work from home, just, all borders and all perimeters are down. So all the more important for more controls, both from an employee awareness perspective, as well as technology controls, which you can put in place as much as you can. But I do keep saying that, this has really changed the way we work, the future of work. We have to trust our employees more. Trust our people more as leaders, and at the same time, each one of us, while we are working from home, have to take more accountability because there is nobody else in the office to tell you what to do, right? You're on your own at home. So that is, I think, important, and I think people are figuring this out. From a regulatory perspective, we will definitely see changes which are coming, especially for the remote working, the gig economy. In India, if you see in the next 1 year, watch out for the labor code which is coming, the new labor codes which are becoming effective on, I think, 1st April. So that's going to impact all business which is running in India. The data privacy bill, the law may come. That's another very big one which is going to impact how we all work. So there are things that the regulators and the governments are doing to, and hopefully these will, these are all going to improve life and work. But we need to watch out and we need to be prepared.
Thanks, Prabha.
Thank you, Janardhan Kurup. I think that brings us to the end of our questions, and we spent quite, I think, almost close to 2 hours. May I request Pratap to propose the word of thanks?
May I just add, Ajit, that I want to really thank not just the audience, of course, but I want to thank the core team, all of you who are there, because you have guided me through this. It was a fantastic experience for me as well. And thank you for all the inputs and the mentoring guidance that you all gave me. I thoroughly enjoyed, especially also Papin's posters, which was very, very nice. So thank you all.
Thank you, Prabha. We were honored to have you on this platform. Thank you. Over to Pratap.
So good evening to all of you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, please go ahead.
So, as Prabha said, a good compliance means good business. And when a good governance and compliance is in place, the business becomes more competitive and flourish well. Prabha started off with an excellent example highlighting the importance of compliance from a reputation point of view, from an jurisdiction point of view, importance of good governance, followed by what happens when you really break the rules, like when you become non-compliant. She very well explained the Volkswagen case, and she highlighted the importance of regulatory impact, loyalty impact, impact on employees when the trust is broken, when the company faces a non-compliance issue. This was then followed by a very good description about the various acts prevailing, like anti-bribery, anti-corruption, then the prevention of sexual harassment acts, which are very much important for any employee to understand and digest today. Then looking at compliance from various perspectives, from a product perspective, from an occupational health and hazard perspective, and also from a perspective of intellectual property rights, how to take care of your data privacy, importance of preserving your sensitive personal data, importance of protection of data for the investor. So thank you, Prabhu, for covering all these points. It was very informative, and I'm sure all of us will have a lot of takeaways from this session. So thank you once again. It was very informative, very brief, but a lot of things explained in a very systematic way, which had still, I can see that 50 people still glued to the screens, which shows the impact of this presentation. Secondly, I would like to thank Mr. Johnson, who gave us a welcome speech today. Johnson is one of the senior most members of CET in Mumbai. Johnson has taken his time and given us an excellent welcome speech today. Also to Mr. Ajit, who as usual come up with an excellent choice and an excellent presenter, and also to Papan, which everybody knows by now is the heart and soul of the entire program, by giving his excellent posters, which gives a fairly good idea about the person as well as the subject which is being presented. And finally, to all of you audience, without whom this program would not have reached this session 6, and for some more in future, all of you, we are thankful to all of you for waiting and hearing us throughout the day. And most of us went little late, almost close to 9 o'clock in India, and for the people in US and for the people in UK who have joined, thanks to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again to all the audience. It's great to reach out to so many alumni.
Thank you, Pratap. So we will sign off now. Bye, and see you all in session 7.